My name is Steve, call sign G0 FFB Golf 0 Fox Baker. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about antennas. Don't worry, no blinding facts, numbers or anything else. We're just going to talk about antennas. The first antenna you'll come across is probably the dipole. This here is a dipole. Di meaning two, poles meaning obviously two poles. The dipole antenna is very simple. We take two elements, we split the coax, the RG58 coax, we put the middle of the coax to one and we put the shield, or the earth as people call it, to the other one. And then if we hold them a controlled distance away, then we put an SWR meter into the coaxial feed line. We can then tune this for resonance. So the antenna will become like a tuning fork with audio waves. You've all seen the piano tuner when he taps the tuning fork and then he plays the note and he listens, right? Antennas are exactly the same. If we tune this to the frequency that we want to transmit on, it will act like the tuning fork. In other words, it will resonate, it will be resonant. And the dipole is an awesome antenna because in this format, vertical, it radiates in a 360-degree pattern. A bit like if you held a torch up in the air in the middle of a field, the light would scatter like that down to the corners of the field. Everywhere would be illuminated with the edges being dimmer than the middle. But if we hold it that way, like that, horizontally, the energy would be projected that way and that way. So we would have like a partial beam. We could split our power between two directions. Now the dipole, as I've said, consists of the two elements. But what's important is that from that tip to this tip is 1/2 wavelength at the frequency that you wish to operate on. Or in other words, 2/4 wavelengths. Now the way we would get this to resonate, as I've said, is we would use an SWR meter, but we would initially measure the SWR transmit. The SWR meter would show us possibly in the red, and what we would do is we would trim off 1 millimetre to 2 millimetres off each end and then try again, and we would keep trimming until we were out of the red and we were as low as we could possibly get that needle towards the number 1. Or 1-to-1 as radio amateurs call it. A 2-to-1 is not particularly good. You're losing some power. A 3-to-1 is becoming, things are starting to eat up. A 5-to-1, you possibly blow your radio, and a 10-to-1, any operating at all for any length of time would damage your radio. So once we've got our dipole to resonance, then we could just use it like that if we wish, but if it's fixed like that and somebody calls us from over here because they're hearing us, partially hearing us from our side, then they would only be receiving a small amount of our radiated wave. So we would have to put this Yagi antenna on a rotator so we could spin it round to talk to our friends. Now that's okay. But don't forget, 50% of our power is going the other way as well, which means if we're talking forwards to our friend and there's somebody in a different town behind us, we are going to be interfering with him. He's going to be able to hear our transmission as well. Now, two gents in the 1960s called Mr. Uda and Mr. Yagi found out if you took the dipole and you added a second element called a reflector, which is just longer than a 1/2 wavelength from there to there, your energy, most of it, will be transferred forwards. So now when we transmit, people behind us will receive very little of our RF, and people forwards of us, where our energy is being radiated, will receive most of our RF. Now this is really good with the Baofeng because we've only got low power, so we've only got 3.5 watts, and we want to put it where we want to put it. Now the vertical stance of a Yagi suits people at home on FM who use white stick antennas. You'll have seen them up on their roofs. They've got a white stick up in the air, and it's got 3-4 radials off the bottom of it. That's a vertical, and most FM traffic on the higher bands is vertically polarised. So if you had this and you had it on a rotator, you could speak to your friends who were vertical in their homes. You could speak to mobiles that are they've got verticals on the top of their car. You could speak to repeaters, and you could direct all your power the direction you wanted it to go. If we tipped it that way, we would have 20 to 25% signal loss, because it's polarised differently, between the polarisation between that and that. If we try to talk to a station of the opposite polarity, we will have losses, 25%, in extreme cases 30%. Well, we don't want to do that. So we have to decide what our target interest in the hobby is. If it's going to be later on you're going to buy yourself an all-mode radio with single sideband, then quite possibly you will have a Yagi like this, possibly with more elements, on a rotator, that you can speak to people further away on single sideband who are also horizontal. And at the top of your rotator pole you'll probably have a white stick antenna, so that when you're speaking to people on FM, then you can speak to them something like this, yeah, on this vertical. And when you want to speak on single sideband, you'd be using your Yagi. Now what Mr. Huda and Mr. Yagi found out was, if you added more elements in front of this driven element, this half wavelength, and each of those new elements slightly was smaller, going all the way along, your beam got narrower and narrower. A bit like, until you can end up with it a bit like a surgeon's scalpel. Yeah. You can actually pick out people who, there may be 5 stations all within a geographical area close together calling you. And if your antenna's got enough elements, you can single each one of them out. Whereas this one, its beam is still wide. It would transmit into that area, but it would be transmitting to all 5 stations at once and receiving from them. So although most of my energy will go that way, it's still not narrow enough to pick each station out. So we would put more elements in front, called directors. Think of it as directing your beam. How many you put out there is entirely up to yourself. You can buy a 20 element Yagi, you can buy a 9 element Yagi, you can buy a 5 element Yagi. All that happens is your beam gets narrower and narrower the more elements you have. I hope you've enjoyed my quick talk on the Yagi antenna and the dipole. You do see these around. There's a company at the moment sells just dipoles for the 4 meter band, I think, which is 70 megahertz. This Yagi has been trimmed and made for the 433 megahertz band. 2 elements was just enough to do what I needed it to do, which was local work on FM. Well, 73s, I hope I didn't confuse anybody, and if I did, I apologise. If you've got any questions, ask away. If I can answer them, I will. If I can help, it's not a problem. Just let me know. 73s for now.